changed his name to Thoth, T-H-O-T-H. Thoth was, in Egypt, he was the scribe, the person who wrote down history. Since he lived for so long, he just kept writing it down. And so everything that I've learned from this pretty much was originally from Thoth. However, his wife was Shizat, and she was also a scribe. She was equally writing down the history. And this is something I think that people need to understand. Almost all of modern history was written by men, and the women were just, their ideas of what took place were just dropped out. But in Egypt, that never took place. Thoth wrote down his ideas of what he believed, his observations and what he saw, and his wife wrote down her observations. They did not correspond at all the times. They saw things differently. They were like a coin with a heads and a tail. And one side was male and one side was female. And really, to really know history and to understand history, you must have both the male and female point of view, or you do not get a full picture of what really took place. Now we need to add another piece to all of this so it begins to make more sense. And you can begin to see that this is just not fantasy, but this is science and mathematics. There was a man named Carl P. Munk who discovered something incredible. And this was toward the end of last century, I think, maybe even as early as the 1980s. But he discovered that when you go to any of these pyramids and churches and temples around the world, that they have a code written on the outside of the building. You don't even have to go inside. It has to do with the shape, with the number of steps, and a lot of different forms that are on the outside of these things. You can go onto his website if you wish to understand what he's talking about in detail. And this is just a review of his work, by the way. This is I'm not going to go into great detail on this. I'm only going to just give a review of it. So each one of these pyramids, when you look at them, or buildings, will, from the external view of it, will, if you know how to read this code, will produce these series of 3 numbers. And these 3 numbers tell you exactly, it's the longitude, latitude of a grid, not the one we're using today, but an ancient one. And those numbers, in order to arrive at that precision where every single one of those 83,000 sites are precisely on Earth, to arrive at that, we would normally imagine that they would have to be in space and have satellites, a GPS system like we have today. I mean, how could they do this? But what his work has shown is that this is true, that these codes that are coming out of these pyramids are real and actually do delineate. But in order to understand what the system is, you have to look at something very interesting. Ra and Aragat and Chikatet Arlich Vomalites, they knew where the new poles were going to be, and they knew what the new equator was going to be, which is the one we have now. They knew that before, at least 200 years before it actually happened. They calculated that, however they did that. But the prime meridian that we use today is not the one he uses. The one that Thoth is using is the Great Pyramid itself. If you take the North Pole and the South Pole and run a line directly over the apex of the Great Pyramid, that is the prime meridian of this system. And which makes sense. It's the first building that was built. And furthermore, that first building wasn't just placed anywhere on Earth. It happens to be the precise center of the entire landmass of the Earth. They knew that even if you couldn't find that building for some reason, that that spot is not going to move more than a few inches over 13,000 years. There's another thing about Carl's work that's pretty interesting. It was introduced into the United Nations, and the whole system of all of this was given to them, and exactly how it works, and this the new system that they had found and everything, and how this all these pyramids were all around the world were connected to it. And but they didn't know what to do. I mean, it defies everything that modern man knows about ancient man. This makes ancient man on almost the same level that we're on, and how could this possibly be? But they couldn't deny it either, because there it was. It was mathematical fact. And so it's been kind of just shoved under the floor of the somewhere in the United Nations. Has been put under a carpet somewhere and just forgotten because it didn't fit into anything that we know. And so what I'd like to do now is just to read to you directly from Carl's work some of what he has found to be true, and then you'll begin to understand this. I was trying to develop a code system to be based on the language of latitude and longitude, degrees, minutes, and seconds. The idea being to multiply the three numbers in each set to a single number, 15 degrees times 15 minutes times 01.6000 seconds. Products at 360, the number of degrees of an arc in any circle. For example, when I divided 360 degrees constant by 19 degrees, 18 minutes to 01.05263157892 seconds, I found myself on the parallel of latitude which crosses the Mexico's round 360 degrees Quihuiculico pyramid just south of Mexico City. But later, when probing the larger 21,600, the number of nautical miles in the Earth's polar circumference, I found that when I divided it down through 51 degrees and 10 minutes to 42.3529411 seconds, it crossed the exact center of England's Stonehenge, another round 360-degree monument, which originally had 60 stones around its perimeter, as 60 stones times 360 degrees multiplies to exactly 21,600. Problem is, these pyramid grid scenarios kept coming. Egypt's El Kula pyramid at 36, its bent pyramid of Sinafu, 180, the Druid Mound in Massachusetts, 180, the earthen ideogram fort at Newark, Ohio, 2,160, the Temple of the Atlantis at Tula in Mexico, 2,880, the Giza Sphinx at 5,400, Georgia's Kolomoliki Mound, 7,200, Ohio's Seep Mound, 8,640, Mississippi, 10,800, the Great Triangle drawn on the plains of Nazca in Peru, 17,280, and Germany's Golo Earth Circle near Bond, 27,000. The eye and the mile-long face at Poverty Point, Louisiana, 32,400. The Oregon Vortex, 48,600. Manos, another drawing on Nazca's plains, 64,800. And North Bimini's Shark Mound, and the pyramid at the Magicians at Uxmal, 129,600, all of which are divisible by 360. Now that you've heard Munch's words, you begin to understand that there is this precision grid of 83,000 sites all over the world that are precisely put on the planet, precisely in very specific places, and that it was not possible that this could have been done by all these indigenous tribes like the Mayans or the Egyptians or the Chinese, etc., but rather it had to be a single mind, a single thought, a single plan to do this. There is no other way. And this changes the whole understanding of history and who we were before and who we are now. And so now you can see what Chikitet Arlich Vomalites and Ra and Ararat were doing. They were creating these structures all over the world to change the internal flow of the Earth's energies, which is called geomancy, so that the external flow was altered, and in so doing, slowly creating this electromagnetic field, that's the geometrical electromagnetic field that surrounded the Earth. And in doing that, they were recreating our consciousness grid so that we would be able to ascend. This is a gift of love. It shows that we are not alone in our consciousness and what is going on with us in this world, and that we have not been forgotten. They remember us, and they're taking care of us. These are our ancestors. These are the old ones that are still connected to us now. They extend through all cultures and all levels of life, even down in German families and American families and and from South Africa or anywhere else, these are our ancestors doing something for us so that we can make a change. And in making this change, we do something for them. We bring them back. We'll explain this later. Now, with that background, with that knowledge and that information, we're going to begin to tell you the living side of all of this, the story that has unfolded around the world over the last really probably 65 years or so. And so it took time. I mean, as Atlantis sank and all the different factors began to happen, the pyramids started to be built continuously all around the world, especially after the first 6,000 years. It took that long. In the precession of the equinoxes, there was a point in there that we had to reach before the pyramids and everything could really start to be built on a massive scale, because humanity was not on a level that they could do those kinds of things. But eventually, after 6,000 years, we were ready. And so these pyramids started to be built here and there in China and Japan and in the Yucatan and Guatemala and South America, all over the world, in Russia. And as this was going on, each time one of these was built, the electronic grid around the Earth would take a little bit more geometrical form and become a little more closer to what would be necessary for us to be able to connect to as a living thing. Progress all the way up until, say, about 65 years ago, directly after World War II. And then things began to happen on another level. We had other people began to become involved in what we were doing. Only 1 year after the World War II was over with, in 1946, the summer of 1946, spaceships appeared all over Europe and every single military base there, almost without exception. The following year, in June of 1947, spaceships appeared all over the military bases all over the United States. How do I know this? Because there's historical documents that most people haven't seen that proves that this is true. And this opened another doorway, because now we began to get extraterrestrials involved in this work of this grid, besides just the ascended masters and humanity. By a little bit later in that, by the 1960s, we began to see crop circles in England. We began to see crop circles that were not only in wheat and different kinds of crops, but we began to see ice circles where they were formed in ice, and circles that were huge, and obviously nobody had stepped on the ground at all. They were perfectly embedded in the ice, and we found thousands of these now. Then we found crop circles that were with trees in Canada, where the trees were formed over. No human being could have done this either. And though we do know through Colin Andrews that about 80% of the crop circles were man-made, the other 20% are not human, at least human as we know it, based crop circles. This was another level of communication that began to take place around the world. It was important communication, but to this day we haven't really understood what they were saying. As we got closer up into about the 1980s, a phenomenon began to take place, and there was probably many of you watching this may remember this. From about 1983, 4, all the way up, and maybe even as early as 1980 or so, all the way up to about 1991, 1992, there were people all over the world, and I mean everywhere, that were sitting in meditation. They were mostly people that did do meditation, that were able to understand subtle energies. And in their meditations, they were told that they had to take a crystal to some pyramid, some temple, somewhere in the world, and to program it in a certain kind of way and to place it there. We estimate at least 150,000 to 150,000 people were involved in this. And every time someone went to a certain temple, like Chichen Itza in Mexico, and placed a little crystal in a certain place where they were told to do, this affected the energy of the geomancy of that space just a tiny bit, which would then correct the geometries that were above the earth. after